From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. On Thursday, we unveiled results from another exclusive Eyewitness News and Roger Williams University poll. We asked a number of questions to gauge the mood of the voters following the primary. The headline is in the governor's race. 420 likely voters tell us if the election were held today, 43% would choose Democratic incumbent Gina Raimondo, 36% Republican Alan Fung, 7% say independent Joe Trillo, 9% aren't sure. Now, moderate party candidate William Gilbert and independents Luis Daniel Munoz and Ann Armstrong each received less than 2%. Joining me this week on Newsmakers, a political roundtable to break down the results, Eyewitness News reporter Ted Nesi and our political analyst and pollster Joe Fleming join us. And we welcome back Lisa Pelosi, who was former governor for Lincoln Almond. She was former governor Lincoln Almond's communications director. You weren't elected governor, to my knowledge. And from our partners at Roger Williams University, Ed Fitzpatrick.
She would have won, though.
I know, for sure. She has very high approval ratings, I'm sure. All right, so I should mention our poll comes with a margin of error of 4.8%. And if I have the date right, September 14th through the 17th,
That's
we're
correct.
in the field. Okay, so let's go around the table. Ted, we'll start with you. I always like a brief answer here. The governor has opened up a 7-point lead over Alan Fung. In our last two polls, she was only up by a couple of points. Did this surprise you, and briefly, why or why not?
You know, it would have surprised me a few weeks ago, but I think I sort of reassessed the governor's situation politically after the primary. I think she surprised a lot of political observers by getting that big 24-point victory, I believe it was, over Matt Brown, which suggested to me her campaign is doing a perhaps more effective job than we were thinking before the primary, which made me think that she might get a bump out of this. But I would say I think this was a little stronger for the governor than I might have predicted.
Joe?
I was a little bit surprised, but a couple of things. I think first, the fact that she spent $1.7 million in paid media in the last 2.5 months, but Alan Fung really has not been on with the paid media. And also, I think she got a little bump as a result of the primary, doing better than people expected. So I expected her to be ahead, but this is a little bit larger than I thought.
Ed?
Yeah, I don't think it can be too surprising when she did so well in the primary and when she spent nearly $2 million over the previous 2 months. So we'll see if that 7-point lead is it solid support or is it soft? And then with Trillo and Fung really ramping up their campaigns in the next few weeks.
Lisa?
No, I was not surprised that she was ahead. First of all, Matt Brown did not run a strong campaign, and he really didn't beat her up. We didn't see any type of commercials on television against her, though we saw so many of hers against him. So I was expecting her to be strong. I think the one thing that surprised me, and I know we'll get into this a little bit later, is how Bob Flanders came in at about 35%, Alan Fung came in at 36%. And there's such a difference in both of their candidacies, so I'm a little surprised that number is about the same.
So, we'll get into the U.S. Senate race on the second half of the program, but let's stick with that theme. Ted, Bob Flanders aside, 36% has been where we've seen Alan Fung, not only in the polls, right, but 2014, isn't that about where he was with the electorate? Do you think there's some concern on the campaign side there might be a ceiling?
Yeah, I mean, you know, earlier in the year, you might have said that's a good thing, right? He's locked down Alan Fung 36% of the vote. He got it in the 2014 election. He's had 36% to 37% in all our polls this year. But now we're in late September. The election's in less than 8 weeks, and we're still not seeing any signs of growth off that 36%. And I think Lisa's point is a really crucial one about Bob Flanders. Bob Flanders, not a veteran politician, new face, certainly has not been a nominee for major offices before, like Alan Fung, or a mayor of a major city, and yet it would appear then that Alan Fung is capturing barely more than sort of the base Republican vote that Flanders has. He's really got to find a way to reach people who have so far, now for a number of years, not been with Alan Fung.
So, where has the governor seen the most growth within this poll, Joe?
Well, I think it stands right out, female voters. In the last poll we did in July, she had a 10% lead among female voters. Now she has a 20% lead. The male voters are about the same. Alan Fung had a 6-point lead in July. He now has a 7-point lead. So her growth has been big time among female voters.
We have on the screen this is we should mention a crosstab from our poll. So these are women voters in our poll, 50% for Gina Raimondo, 30% for Alan Fung, and 6% for Joe Trillo. We should always note that with these crosstabs, it's a smaller sample, so the margin of error goes up. Continue.
Yes. So, I mean, I think the thing is, if she can hold on to this 50% of female voters, it puts her in a strong position. The question, I think, Ed mentioned earlier, is her 43% soft or strong?
Yeah.
We know she has 38% strong. Is this 4 or 5% she just picked up? Is it soft support as a bump from the primary, or can she continue to hold this on? She has the resources to really get a message out there and hold on to it.
Well, that, to me, the 43%, how solid is that, is important in the context of, I was a little surprised that not only 9% of the voters in this poll are undecided. To me, you know, we still have a little over 6 weeks to the general election. I thought that number might be a little bit higher.
I thought it would too at first, but keep in mind, these are two candidates of the major parties that ran 4 years ago. They're both well known. People have their opinions of them. We look at Gina Raimondo's favorability and job rating. That hasn't changed in all the polls we've done. People are set with their opinion of her. It looks like they're fairly set with their opinion of Alan Fung. So they're deciding, it looks like, at this time.
All right, I want to bring up for you, Lisa, the governor's job performance numbers. And we've been polling this throughout, and there really hasn't been a lot of movement from our last poll and the poll previous to that. And when we ask about job performance, it's how people think she's doing in her job. And here are the results. She has a 38% excellent or good, 27% fair, or 33% poor, 2% aren't sure. You know, here's a lesson to journalists. Take good notes, because I realized looking down I had the wrong numbers until I looked up at the screen. And those are the right ones on the screen. So, Elisa, how do you think this squares with her 7-point lead in the governor's race? Those aren't great numbers.
And I think that just goes back to what you're saying, that it's soft right now. And I always think about when you take that snapshot polling, people are picking up the phone. What's on their mind right there? With the women who took your poll, I'm thinking, could it be that the Brett Kavanaugh, as he goes toward his nomination for Supreme Court in Washington, because of everything that's been surrounding that the women answered and they were very upset about what's going on, and they wanted to support, again, another female in a high office. So that's why the next poll, I think, is going to be even more important to see how her numbers are.
Well, you never know how long the Brett Kavanaugh thing's going to drag out. Okay, so don't make any predictions. We haven't talked about Joe Trillo yet, and I'm going to go to you with this. So we have a 7-point margin of victory, or lead, I shouldn't say margin of victory, lead for the governor right now. And who has 7 points in our poll? Joe Trillo. Yes or no, Ed Fitzpatrick, if Joe Trillo were not in the race, this poll would have been tied?
Oh yeah, I think it would be very close, because I think Trillo voters are not going to go to Raimondo. They would go to Fung. You know, he was the head of the Trump campaign in Rhode Island, and you know, there's going to be enormous pressure on him to get out. You know, you saw tweets last night about doing the math there and saying that's the gap. So you know, he says he's in it to win it, and you know, he's trying to do what Bob Healy did 4 years ago. But you know, I knew Bob Healy, and Joe Trillo is no Bob Healy.
To make that line up?
He doesn't have quite the haircut or the beard, but he does have some great YouTube videos, and you know, is trying to introduce himself to people. A lot of people don't know him. They really do know Raimondo and Fung from the last election, the governor and the mayor of a big city, but they may not know Trillo. So he's got room to grow, but you know, he is 6 weeks left. He doesn't have very long to introduce himself.
Joe Trillo.
Well, one interesting crosstab we looked at was people, how they voted for governor and how they view Gina Raimondo's job performance. 68% of people who have said they're voting for Joe Trillo rate Governor Raimondo's job performance as poor. So there's no way those people are going to be voting for the governor. Mm-hmm. So Joe Trillo, I believe, would give a lot of his votes over to Alan Fung if he was in the race. Not all of them, but a majority.
So, Ted, Joe Trillo immediately fired back at our poll. He sent out a press release, and he strongly suggested his poll numbers are much better than what we found when we went into the field. Is it possible he's polling at 40% and we found 7%?
No, it's not possible. I am absolutely confident between our own polling and my reporting on what other campaigns are seeing, and what that we are not the only poll out there. We're just the only one being released to the public, so voters can know what's going on. Joe Trillo, as you said at the top, Tim, there is a margin of error to these polls. We don't claim that everyone is exactly at 43%, exactly at 30. What we're saying is, generally speaking, you have Governor Raimondo with a plurality of the vote, Alan Fung a bit behind her, but definitely the strongest second place candidate, and Joe Trillo getting enough to make a difference, but still languishing pretty far down. And I think there's no reason to think, based on what Joe Trillo has done so far, he would be far above the support he had. He has not been on TV. He was overshadowed by the primary. The debates haven't started. So we're not predicting Joe Trillo will get 7%, but we're saying right now only 7% of the voters are telling pollsters when they call that they're with him.
And then, too, can I just jump in, too? Please. Because what we have seen of Joe Trillo over the summer was not positive publicity for him, be it on his signs, perhaps not being up legally in Narragansett, what was going on with his boat. And your poll showed that his disapproval, people who know him, a large number don't like him.
It's still that way now.
But I think it will be interesting to see if the House Minority Leader, Patricia Morgan, throws her support to Trillo. That could help him. And he is going to be on the stage with the two major party candidates next week, Thursday at Roger Williams University, so it really, this poll really does set the stage for that debate.
And I would say, the flip side for Joe Trillo is we've seen before. I mean, President Trump is the classic example. He never had great favorable ratings in the 2016 presidential race, but Hillary Clinton didn't either. And in the end, enough people decided they were going to take a chance on him. So I think, Joe Trillo, you're better off having stronger favorability numbers than he has here, but that's no reason to think he couldn't start to get up ahead of steam. Bob Healy's success happened very late last time. He was at 8% about a little more than a month out which was our final poll that year, and then you saw Brown University polled a little later. He was at 12, and he ends up with 20. So people can make up their minds late.
One thing though, keep in mind on that poll 4 years ago, Bob Healy had a higher favorable than unfavorable rating. He had about
people
40,
liked Bob.
People liked him. There's still like 40-some% who didn't know who he was, but his favorable was higher than his unfavorable. Joe Trillo is just the opposite. His unfavorable is higher than his favorable. So it's going to be a little bit harder for Joe to move those people, I think.
Yeah, and Healy had run for lieutenant governor and governor year after year for decades. He was kind of he was part of Rhode Island political law.
All right, so for your planning purposes, we are going to push the Trump conversation of the second half because it affects, I think, two races in this. But Ed brought up something, Lisa, that I want to bring up with you, and that it just feels like the Republican Party right now, anyway, is splintered. And we saw this after the primary in 2014 as well. As he points out, Patricia Morgan has not endorsed Alan Fung just yet. I mean, does the Republican Party need to go camping for a couple of days, hang out around the campfire and heal? I mean, the Democratic Party seems to solidify a little bit more than the Republicans.
So the Democratic Party is pretty big in the state, but there are a lot of different factions in the Democratic Party. The Republican Party is small, but there are a lot of different factions in it too. And I think because we're small, it's more magnified when we have disagreements, and I think that's what we're seeing here.
I also think with the Republicans having covered this phenomenon for a number of years, power can make a difference. And because the Republicans generally are out of power in Rhode Island, it also, I think, leads to more competition, whereas the Democrats sometimes have a reason to paper over their differences or keep them behind the scenes because the people who are fighting all have access. They want something. They have, are you going to fight with the incumbent Democratic governor who might have a bill before? I think it actually can be a difficult thing where being out of power actually creates more room for factionalism, whereas the Democrats are like, well, we want to control that office like we do now, so we'll paper this over for a bit longer.
Real quick before we go to break, compared to 2014, how important is it, do you think, the AFL-CIO endorsed the governor?
Well, I think it's important for the governor for the simple reason that in 2014, most of those people probably voted for Bob Healy, I believe, because they didn't want to vote for the governor, they didn't want to vote for a Republican, so they had an alternative. Now the question is, can the leadership of the AFL-CIO bring that down to the rank and file and convince the rank and file to vote for the governor who they did not vote for 4 years ago?
All right, we're going to take a break here on Newsmakers. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Trump effect on both the governor's race, and we're going to take a look at the U.S. Senate race. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers.